yeah, this girl took fake it till you make it to a whole nother level. Hello everyone, I'm your host Stacey, and welcome back to How Did We Get Here episode 4, where we talk about some of the craziest cases throughout history and ask ourselves, how did we get here? So today we are going to be talking about Elizabeth Holmes, the creator of the company Theranos, a consumer healthcare technology company that aimed to democratize healthcare, as she so put it. So her company Theranos actually had a lot of innovative ideas. Her most popular one had to do with blood tests, and she had this idea to do blood tests with only a fraction of the blood that they would normally use. And not only was her goal to use a small amount of blood, but it was also supposed to give you a large amount of data from such a small sample. So this was such an innovative idea, especially since there is nothing like this at the time. When you go and get your blood drawn, they take so many vessels of blood. And she was praised for her innovation. And in 2013, she actually partnered with Walgreens to have the Theranos blood test appear in every Walgreens. Her company was so successful that she was featured in both Forbes and Inc. in 2014. So many young female engineers and scientists that looked up to her, and she had so many other ideas that could have changed healthcare. But there was only one problem with this. Everything she did either didn't work or didn't exist. So Elizabeth Ann Holmes was born on February 3rd, 1984 in Washington, D.C. And her family had a history of being both in the medical field but also in engineering. So she kind of ended up doing like a split in the middle and combining both of those paths into her career. So Elizabeth was actually really close with her uncle, and he was diagnosed with skin cancer at a pretty young age. This quickly spread to his brain, and he died fairly young, which actually then goes on to explain later why she started her company in the first place. A little bit later in life, Elizabeth and her family moved to Texas, where she attended St. John's Prep School in Houston, Texas. In high school, she started her first business selling C++ compilers, which from my understanding are like programs that translate computer codes, and she sold them to Chinese universities. Elizabeth was known for being very, very smart. So smart, in fact, that her parents got her a Mandarin Chinese tutor. Of course, their goal for Elizabeth was to get her into one of the best possible schools, so they thought this was a way to help her be more successful. As a kid, Elizabeth had always said she wanted to be a billionaire one day. That was her main goal in life. And she wanted to create something that was going to change the world. She had always been interested in medicine from the beginning. She wanted to invent her own medicine. So when Elizabeth was around mid-high school age, she tried to get into Stanford's summer Mandarin Chinese program. And at first, they didn't want to let her in. But after convincing enough people by showing them her skills in terms of Mandarin, they did allow her into the class, and she began taking college courses in high school. In 2001, she began attending Stanford full-time, and she studied chemical engineering and worked as a student researcher and a lab assistant at the engineering school. After her freshman year, she started working at a lab at the Genome Institute in Singapore. And then in 2002, she meets a man named Sonny. Now, Sonny was a Silicon Valley tech entrepreneur, and he was 19 years older than her and married to another woman. However, pretty soon he ended up divorcing his wife and began dating Elizabeth. In 2005, they moved in together, but Sonny had not yet joined her company till 2009. But he was still influencing a good amount of her ideas. So one of Elizabeth's first ideas was in 2003, when she filed for a patent for a patch that when you apply it to your skin, it would deliver antibiotics pretty much through the skin. However, currently this is not exactly possible, but she does still technically own the patent for it. In March 2004, she ends up completely dropping out of Stanford, and uses the tuition money to start her company, Real Time Cures, which then later becomes Theranos. So Elizabeth had always been scared of needles, and she saw it as complete torture. So that is when she came up with her ideas to be able to get a small amount of blood to test for a large amount of data. So she begins to start talking to one of her old Stanford professors and even tries to bring it up to some of his co-workers. However, everybody tells her that this is impossible. And since she hadn't invented it yet, no one was really buying it. However, Elizabeth was persistent and she was not going to take no for an answer. Elizabeth goes to the dean and advisor at the School of Engineering at Stanford, Channing Robertson, and gets him to support her. But even though she doesn't have the machine built yet, this was a great idea in theory. And she called this machine the Edison, and it was supposed to be able to test up to 200 blood tests in just a few minutes. Now, the name the Edison for the machine turns out to be very ironic when you know Thomas Edison's background, who, if you didn't know, is also known for being a fraud. However, that's a story for another day. The blood was supposed to be collected in these small little vessels that she called a nanotainer.
Tech company she founded in 2003.
Healthcare is the leading cause of bankruptcy.
You'll see her either in a black turtleneck or a white lab coat, taking a high-tech approach to blood testing. Instead of a needle to the arm, it's a pinprick to the finger. Holmes is marketing Theranos as a faster and cheaper alternative to a process that hasn't meaningfully changed in decades.
So how does it work?
First, we've created these little tiny tubes, which we call the nanotainers, which are designed to replace the big traditional tubes that come from your arm, and instead allow for all the testing to be done from a tiny drop from a finger.
So fast forward to 2004, she officially renames her company from Real Time Cures to Theranos, which was supposed to be a combination of the words therapy and diagnose. So Elizabeth goes on to rent some space in the basement of a group college house and then rents some lab space. And then she starts getting investors pretty quickly, considering the fact that she does not yet have proof that her machine even works. Her first investor was Tim Draper, who was the father of Elizabeth's childhood friend, Jesse Draper, who was also a Silicon Valley venture capitalist. But she was able to convince him that her company was legit, and he goes on to give her $1 million. She then receives support from Rupert Murdoch, who was a successful entrepreneur in the media industry and part of the Walton family, who is best known for Walmart and Sam's Club. She was also able to get support from the Cox family of Cox Enterprise, and her first board member was Secretary of State George Shultz, who got her 12 big-name members on the board, including Henry Kissinger, who was a former Secretary of State and was the National Security Advisor. By December of 2004, Elizabeth was able to raise $6 million for Theranos. And by the end of 2010, Theranos had $92 million in venture capital. Despite not yet having created the machines that she was advertising to them, she was able to get all these people on boards and didn't even have to prove that it worked. And the way that she ran things was that she was very secretive, and she didn't actually tell anybody what she was doing. I don't even think she knew what she was doing. So, like I said, Elizabeth was very secretive, and this was the way she ran her company. In fact, she was so secretive that even a lot of her employees didn't really know what was going on. She said she did this because she... It's okay. So like I said, Elizabeth was very secretive, and she didn't even tell a lot of her employees what was going on. And her reasoning for this was because she said she did not want any other companies to get any idea. But obviously this was very frustrating for her investors because they wanted to see what they were putting their money into. So on September 2013, the company announces that they were partnering with Walgreens to launch in-store blood collection centers. Then in 2014, Forbes ranked her 110 and recognized her as the world's youngest self-made billionaire. But her net worth was estimated at about $4.5 billion. Her company was valued at around $9 billion and was worth more than $400 million in venture capital. In fall 2014, she had moved Theranos to Stanford Research Park in the hills of Silicon Valley, which was described as a community of and for people who wanted to invent the future. And some people that were known to have worked here were Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs. By the time her company moved, she had hired over 800 people and was valued at $10 billion. She had her name on 18 U.S. patents and 66 foreign patents in 2015. And in 2015, she also agreed with Cleveland Clinic, Capital Blue Cross, and AmeriHealth to start using the Thanos technology. In July of 2015, they had developed a test to detect herpes, which was their first and only thing to be approved by the FDA. In 2015, she was appointed as Harvard Medical School's Board of Fellows and was named one of Time's most influential people in the world. She received so many awards, some being Under 30 Doers Award, the Woman of the Year by Glamour magazine, and had an honorary doctorate from the Humane Letter degree from Pepperdine University. So one of the things that made Elizabeth Holmes controversial was that she only ever wore black turtlenecks like Steve Jobs. And people had accused her for copying him, not only because of this, but also because of some of her mannerisms were also compared to Steve Jobs. And she had admitted that she was inspired by him. But she says that she had been doing this as a child and was indeed not copying Steve Jobs. However, there was evidence that she did not always wear these black turtlenecks. Another thing that was controversial about her was her voice. She had the pretty masculine sounding voice, and a lot of people seem to think that it is fake, and she uses it to make her seem more authoritative.
We talked to our lab team and they said, okay, you can do the draw. And so they did this, what would have been a finger stick on this little nub on his arm.
Sure. Yeah. Over the last 11 years, we've reinvented the traditional laboratory infrastructure with a mission to make...
People who have known her in the past have said that this is not the way her voice used to sound like. So this only gets worse. It turned out that Elizabeth Holmes was a fraud, and even though she was getting all these awards, in reality, things were not going very well for her. It turned out the Edison machine that she created didn't actually work. Journalist from Wall Street Journal, John Carrier, got a tip from a medical expert saying that they thought Theranos was suspicious. So John had a secret investigation that lasted about several months. He spoke to multiple ex-employees and got a hold of some company documents. Eventually, Elizabeth found out and she got her lawyers involved, and they threatened both Wall Street Journal and all the ex-employees that if they were to publish this article or the ex-employees were going to continue leaking information about the company, that she was going to pursue legal action. But in October 2015, John decides to release the article anyway. This article reveals that the blood testing device that Elizabeth created didn't actually work. A lot of these people who were getting their blood drawn were kind of basically just getting their blood drawn in a traditional method. The whole point of Theranos' Edison machine was that they were only supposed to do a finger prick, and it was only supposed to be a small amount of blood, but they were telling patients that their physician had wanted them to do a certain special test, and so that they needed to get more than just one drop. So this article completely exposes Theranos as a fraud. When John talked to ex-employees, he also found out that the Edison machine also broke pretty often, and there were people constantly having to go in to repair it, which posed a lot of health and safety threats to workers because they were being exposed to random blood samples. And John was able to prove that technologically the things that Theranos was claiming to do wasn't actually possible yet. And there were so many cases of people who did tests through Theranos and were told that they were completely fine, but when they went to get traditional testing, it turned out that they had diseases like cancer.
But the technology was faulty, and prosecutors say Holmes knew it. Arizona resident Erin Tompkins said during trial she got a false positive for HIV, which caused her emotional distress. Another Theranos user said her medication was changed as a result of a faulty test result, which led to a heart attack.
Theranos advertised their machine as automated and very fast. However, many employees came out to say that it indeed was not. It would often take up to 6 hours for them to even get the machine set up, not even including them actually running the blood through it. Employees also came out to say that they had to sign non-disclosure agreements and that overall their experience working there was very sketchy. They were forced to sign paperwork pretty much saying that they couldn't talk badly about the company and that if they did, they would be liable for anything that they said. So everyone at Theranos had a key card, and this allowed Sunny and Elizabeth to be able to watch where everyone was at all times. They even tracked all their emails. Elizabeth actually ended up going on Mad Money with Jim Cramer and tried to say that everything in the article was fake.
Again, because first of all, it's the Wall Street Journal. This is not the National Enquirer here. But they did say that they, after they pursued you for an interview for 5 months. You declined interview requests from the Journal for more than 5 months. Last week, the company said she would be available, but her schedule didn't allow it before the publication of this article. Why not just sit down with them? I mean, it's a reputable outfit. Why not just sit down with them months ago and explain your side of the story?
Sure, yeah. I mean, the Journal actually had a member of their editorial board write the very first piece on Theranos, and that person, Joe Rago, came out to our lab, saw our systems, and really got insight into our work. That was about a year ago. I published my op-ed in the Journal, and unfortunately, in this case, the reporter focused on sources who we knew in 2004 and 2005, who were the people who had said to me that there was no way I was going to succeed and be able to build this kind of company, and focused on questions like asking whether I could prove that I actually invented the patents that my name were on. And those are not very fruitful conversations in the context of engagement. But when we had the opportunity to engage with more people in the Journal, we said we absolutely were ready to sit down and do that. And unfortunately, they offered a 3-day window in which we had told them I was not available before it was quote unquote necessary to get this published.
But obviously, people did not believe what she was saying anymore. In January 2016, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid did an inspection of Theranos' labs and discovered a lot of irregularities with the staff's proficiency, procedures, and equipment. So CMS put out a warning letter to Theranos about the inspection results. In February 2016, Theranos announces that they were going to allow the Cleveland Clinic to do a study on their technology and whether or not their results were valid. In March 2016, the study appears in the Journal of Clinical Investigation, stating that the blood test results were outside of their normal range, 1.6 times more often than other testing services, meaning that most likely a lot of their results were inaccurate. In March 2016, CMS actually proposes that Elizabeth face a 2-year ban from owning or operating a lab because she didn't fix the problems that were going on with Theranos. At this point, Sunny completely bails on Theranos and both of them break up. She said that she fired him, but with Elizabeth, who knows at this point? In June 2016, Forbes actually releases an article claiming that the value of the company dropped from $10 billion all the way down to $800 million. In July 2016, CMS completely bans her from owning, operating, or directing blood testing services for the next 2 years. Theranos tries to appeal, but at this point they have pretty much lost everything, including their partnership with Walgreens. In August of 2016, they tried to introduce a new robotic capillary blood testing machine called a mini lab. But again, she had no proof that this could work. That was the problem with Elizabeth, is that she had a lot of great ideas. However, none of them were actually put into place. In 2017, she was sued by Arizona State for conducting false labs. They actually sold 1.5 billion blood tests to Arizona citizens, and that was the reason they were suing her for. In 2018, her company completely tanked. She was getting lawsuits and investigations, and she had to fire a majority of her employees. At this point, she was down to 24 employees, which were eventually fired by the end of the year. On June 15th, 2018, a federal grand jury indicted Elizabeth and Sonny on 9 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. So Elizabeth finally stepped down as the CEO of Theranos, but she still remains the chairman of the board. On September 4th, Elizabeth announces that Theranos would be completely shut down and her company had pretty much become worthless. Elizabeth's defense team tried to argue that she should face a maximum of 18 months in prison. However, as I am recording this 2 days ago, she was sentenced to 11 years in prison. So that is the story of Miss Elizabeth Holmes. So now the question that I have for you is, do you think Elizabeth was lying the whole time and actually knew that her product wasn't going to work? Or do you think she was just a woman who had really good ideas but kind of flopped when it came to actually putting them into existence? Because I do think it's possible that Elizabeth was just overly confident and messed up. However, she did do this over and over and over and over again. So at a certain point, it gets hard to actually believe anything she was saying. But thank you for joining me on today's episode of How Did We Get Here? Be sure to tune in next week where we will look at another crazy case.